I'll be honest, when this story first crossed my feed, I almost scrolled past it. A cat that talks. A meow that sounds like hello. That's the kind of headline that usually turns out to be some 10-second clip stretched into something it isn't. Then I found the actual shelter records, the medical intake, the volunteers' own account of the day it happened. And one detail about where this cat came from changed how I read the whole thing. I'll get to that part in a few minutes. Eastern Oregon, a quiet neighborhood. The kind where a stray showing up isn't unusual. Except this particular stray kept coming back, night after night, and nobody in that house had any idea what they were actually looking at. If a story like this is the kind of thing you want more of, go ahead and subscribe now. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. Okay, here's how it started. A woman living in the house noticed him first. A big orange cat, patchy fur. Scars scattered across his coat, like he'd been in more fights than anyone could count. He'd show up near the back porch looking for scraps, then disappear again before she could get close. What got her wasn't how he looked. It was the sound he made. His meow wasn't like other cats. Rough, almost cracked, like a voice that hadn't been used in a while. She mentioned it to her husband almost as a joke at first, that the cat outside sounded like he was trying to say something. They started leaving food out, water too, and slowly, the cat stopped running the second he saw them. They started calling him Clancy. Nobody knew exactly how long he'd been out there. Long enough that his teeth were rotting from bad nutrition. Long enough that he was carrying a bladder infection that had clearly gone untreated for months. The vets who eventually examined him figured close to 7 years on the street, based on his condition alone. Here's the thing that got me. Once I actually looked into it, cats that spend that long living wild usually go one of two ways. Either they stay defensive around people for the rest of their lives, or they become so withdrawn they barely respond to anyone at all. Clancy did neither. Every time someone came near his cage later on, he'd practically launch himself at the bars for attention. In my opinion, that's the part of the story people skim past too fast. Something about him never fully gave up on people. Even after 7 years of no real reason to trust them, the woman started calling shelters, trying to find him somewhere permanent to go. Every single one turned her down. Too full. Too many cats already waiting. And a 7-year-old stray with unknown health problems wasn't exactly first in line for anyone's limited space. Then one morning, he didn't come to the porch the way he usually did. She found him lying near the fence, barely lifting his head when she called his name, his usual head bump greeting. The thing he did to basically everyone didn't happen. He just lay there, weak, breathing shallow, one paw curled up against his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. She'd never seen him go quiet like that. Not once. Not even in the beginning, when he barely trusted her enough to eat 6 feet away. She knelt down next to him in the grass, and honestly wasn't sure in that moment whether he was going to make it to the car. She wrapped him in a blanket right there in the yard and drove him to the nearest rescue that had any space at all, a small operation without much in the way of resources. They could stabilize him. They couldn't do much more than that. Blood work came back a few days later. FIV positive, feline immunodeficiency virus, fairly common in cats who spent years fighting to survive outdoors. On top of that, infected teeth that needed to come out and a bladder infection that had clearly been building for a long time. Now, I want to pause here because there's a piece of this that changes how the rest of the story lands. FIV positive cats are some of the hardest animals in any shelter system to place. They need to live indoors, alone, away from other cats for the rest of their lives. Most shelters, especially small ones without much funding, simply can't take on that kind of long-term responsibility. Realistically, a lot of rescues in that position make a hard call and focus their limited resources on animals with better odds, Younger, healthier, easier to adopt out. Nobody would have blamed that first small rescue if they'd made that same call with Clancy. I've thought about that part more than I expected to, whether it was really the right decision, resource-wise, to put everything into one older, sick stray instead of 3 or 4 kittens who'd find homes in a week. I don't have a clean answer for that. I just know what they actually chose to do. The staff at that first rescue knew Clancy needed somewhere bigger, somewhere with the resources to actually treat him. They reached out to the cat adoption team in Sherwood, Oregon, one of the largest cat rescues in the whole Pacific Northwest. It was close to a long shot, but a staff member there heard about the talking cat with the huge cheeks and the rough little meow, and something about it stuck with her enough to say yes. Clancy got transferred, neutered, treated for the infection. His rotting teeth came out in emergency surgery. Teeth that had likely been causing him pain with every single bite for years. Pain he'd just been living with because there was no other option. For an animal his age, in the shape he was in, that much surgery at once was its own risk. Staff didn't make any promises about how he'd come through it. He came through it slower than they hoped, at first. A couple of quiet days where he barely moved from the same corner of his cage. Then, gradually, he started to look less like a survivor and more like an actual house cat. He put on weight. His coat filled back in. Volunteers said he started sleeping stretched all the way out, belly up, which staff there said was rare for a cat with his history. Most of them never fully let their guard down, even after everything got better. And that's when the meowing really started. Not just the rough little chirp from before. Something closer, almost eerily close to actual words. A volunteer swore she heard him say, "Hello," clear as day one afternoon while she was scratching behind his ears. She laughed it off at first. Cats don't talk, obviously, until he did again, looking straight at her. They started recording him. The clips went up online, and within days, people who'd never think twice about a shelter cat were watching Clancy have entire back-and-forth conversations with volunteers. I don't know exactly what's going on biologically when a cat makes a sound that close to a real word. Maybe it's coincidence stacked on coincidence. Maybe cats pick up more from us than we usually give them credit for. Honestly, I go back and forth on it every time I watch the footage. What the videos did, though, was solve a problem the shelter had been stuck on for weeks. An older cat, FIV positive, needing a single cat household and lifelong vet care, that a hard sell under normal circumstances. A cat who seemed to be having actual conversations with strangers online was a different story entirely. A woman named Sandy found one of those videos scrolling through her phone one evening. She'd lost her own cat not long before, after almost 15 years together, and her house had felt a little too quiet since. The kind of quiet where you catch yourself listening for a sound that isn't coming anymore. She watched Clancy's clip more than once before she picked up the phone and called the shelter. When she got there in person, he was lying in his usual spot, sunlight coming to the window behind him. She knelt down. He looked up, made that same rough little sound, and bumped his head against her hand like he'd been doing it his whole life. "Hello there," she said, mostly to see what he'd do. He answered, or at least, it sounded like he did. She filled out the adoption paperwork that same day. Clancy left the shelter for good not long after. The cat adoption team posted the update themselves. The talking cat everyone had fallen for finally had a permanent home. Sandy filled her house with beds and litter boxes and toys he mostly ignored, because it turned out all he really wanted was to follow her from room to room, chirping the whole way, like he had something important to tell her. 7 years on the street, rejected by shelter after shelter, a body full of scars and a voice that sounded like it had been worn down by all of it. And somehow, that same voice ended up being the exact thing that got him a home. If you had a cat like Clancy show up at your door, rough around the edges, talking his head off, would you have taken him in? Write your answer below. Subscribe if this one got to you. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.